Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Kate Bruns, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard University Division of Science, and the Cabot Science Library, I am very, very pleased to welcome you to this evening's program with Karen Olsson, discussing her latest book, The Weil Conjectures, on math and the pursuit of the unknown, in conversation with Harvard's very own Professor Melissa Franklin. So in just a minute, I will turn things over to Melissa, but first I'd just like to say a little bit about the series like I normally do and what exciting events we have coming up later this season. So the Science Book Talk series features talks throughout the academic year by the authors of recently published books on a wide variety of science-related topics. Some of our recent talks have featured authors S. James Gates, Sean Carroll, and Randall Munroe. We hope that you'll join us in the coming weeks when we welcome on November 13th, Lee Smolin, who will discuss Einstein's unfinished revolution, the search for what lies beyond the quantum. On November 19th, Naomi Oreskes will discuss why trust science as well. To learn more about the series or to learn about Harvard Bookstore's other upcoming events, you can visit us at harvard.com and sign up for our weekly email newsletter. Tonight's talk is going to be followed by some time for your questions, after which we'll have a book signing and refreshments in the Cabot Science Library across the Science Center entryway. And if you haven't picked one up already, we'll have copies of the Weil Conjectures for sale in the back of the hall and in the library as well. And as always, I just want to say thank you for buying books from Harvard Bookstore. Your purchases support this author series, and they really do ensure the future of a local independent bookstore. So thank you. And finally, just a last reminder to please silence your cell phones before the talk begins this evening. So now I am very excited to introduce Melissa Franklin, who I should first note is the driving force behind this Science Book Talk series itself. It is her brainchild, as you will. She is the Mallinckrodt Professor of Physics here at Harvard. As an experimental particle physicist who studies proton-proton collisions produced by the Large Hadron Collider, Melissa was also co-discoverer of the top quark and the Higgs boson. I will lastly add that Melissa was the first woman ever to receive tenure in the Harvard Physics Department, and we are so excited to have her here. Please join me now in welcoming Melissa Franklin.
Hey, hi, I'm so excited that everybody's here. But I also should say I've never been in a conversation before, so I just telling you that. I normally just talk. During the summer, a colleague of mine in the math department, Barry Mazur, told me I should read this book, The Weil Conjectures. He said it was fantastic, and he doesn't usually like books like this. By which I think he means books about mathematicians. And I read it, and I just completely fell in love, so I wanted to do this in conversation. Karen Olsson, who's the author, is the author of 2 novels already, Waterloo and All the Houses. And this book is not a novel, and it is not just a memoir, but it is an incredibly beautiful, woven memoir plus biography of 2 amazing thinkers, Simone and André Weil. Karen also is a journalist, and she was a former editor of the Texas Observer. She's a contributing editor of the Texas Monthly. I guess she lives in Texas. She lives in Austin, Texas. The most important thing about her is that she was a Harvard undergraduate. And, sorry, I'm just kidding, right? And that she was a math major, a mathematics major. And after studying mathematics, she went on to be a writer. And that's kind of exciting. So it's wonderful to have her back here. She's written a beautiful book, and it's somewhat about these 2 characters here who you see. On the left is André Weil, born in 1906, and on the right is Simone Weil, his sister, born in 1909. And he was a very, very famous mathematician, and I didn't want to to paraphrase what he did, so I'm just going to say he came up with the Weil Conjectures, which are 4 conjectures, and this basically laid out the framework of modern algebraic geometry and number theory. So that's okay. He did a little bit. He lived until he was 92, and he taught, or not taught, he was at the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study. Simone Weil was a philosopher, a brilliant philosopher, and in fact, she has 22 pages in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And what they say about her is that she is a philosopher of margins and paradoxes, which is kind of beautiful. Okay. They say a lot of other things. It's 22 pages. Unfortunately, she died when she was 34 years old. But these 2 characters are still extremely interesting to most people. And another person that's very interesting is the author herself, Karen Olsson. And the thing I was most drawn to about the book were her own recollections about studying mathematics, which are woven into the book itself. So I wanted to just say that not only are these 2 people extremely interesting in their own right, they had an amazing relationship, and a lot of the book is about that relationship. And I just want to read, this is weird because I'm reading from Karen's book, but I asked first. Simone dreams her brother is a tooth, her own tooth, but not her own. Stuck inside her mouth and schooling her as always, she pushes at him with her tongue to wiggle him loose. Although she doesn't want to be separated, she still has that compulsion to dislodge him, to feel the bloody gap where he used to be. So that was just to show that their relationship was very, very close, and we are going to hear about it more tonight. Karen.
It's so thrilling to be here, and also really overwhelming because I write a lot in the book about being a math major here and being in the Science Center. And over the course of that, even though, of course, this is a real place, it became a kind of fictional place in my head that I was writing about. So I walked in here, I was like, oh, I got it all wrong. It's so different. And yeah, I feel like I'm going to lose my train of thought numerous times and just marvel at the fact that I'm here. It's very emotional. But I'm going to just read a little bit from the book. So as Melissa said, there are different strands woven together. The story of the Weil siblings, my own story as a math major, and also stories of other mathematicians, kind of some of the lore of math, some of the history of it is also woven through there. It's, I think, an easier format to read on the page than to listen to. So I'm going to read an excerpt, and I'm going to leave out some of those sections in hopes that I'm just going to alternate between a little of me and a little of André Weil. Having forgotten whatever I once knew about complex functions, Fourier series, field extensions, compact surfaces, hyperbolic spaces, random walks, etc., I am left with memories of the Science Center at Harvard, a building with a facade like stair-step boxes, constructed around the time I was born in the early 70s. I attended classes there most days and spent I don't know how many nights working on problem sets in the library or in vacant rooms. I remember tracking slush through an entry already muddied by hundreds of boot prints, coming and going, descending to the basement computer center or landing in one of the main floor lecture halls, or making my way upstairs to a classroom empty of charm or even the notion of charm. Though elsewhere, literature and history were taught in stately old rooms softened by high windows and wainscoting, historically appropriate paint colors, the mossy aura of textual study accompanied by a certain whiff of wealth, the sciences had been paired with austere minimalism, that is to say, white walls and black chalkboards and silver conduit pipes leading to clusters of heavy-duty switches. I sat among my fellow students, whizzes, immigrants, nerds with all their anxious humming brain power, in a plastic chair, my backpack at my feet, always afraid that I was about to fall hopelessly behind, but also proud that I'd so far managed to hold on to the fast horse of a difficult class. I who, as a white girl from private school, might have seemed marked for the humanities, but who had wandered over there instead, as though by mistake. As for why Let's see. As for why I was there, I could blame my erratic curiosity, a tendency to follow my nose no matter how many times my nose has led me astray. Or I could say that I was trying to prove myself to no one other than myself. But after more than 2 decades, if anything, my dalliance with math seems like just that, a past love, one I remember with nostalgia and the kind of echo feeling that adheres to the memory of an old romance. I mean, I had always liked math, but just how it came to consume me in college is a question that I produce a different answer to each time I'm asked, whether it's somebody else who's asking or whether I'm asking myself, as I still do from time to time. An Italian ship takes André from Genoa to Bombay. Oh, this is just after he's finished his doctorate and he's going to a teaching job in India. A 2-week voyage, and when the weather is good, he strolls back and forth on the deck, reciting lines from a Sanskrit poem. To shield himself from the southern sun, he wears a cork helmet he bought in Paris, and yet, surrounded by sparkling ocean, he burns in no time. His skin peels, and over the course of 2 weeks, he turns the red-brown color of a fox. From Bombay, he goes by train to Delhi and then on to Aligarh, where the 2 men who've been sent to greet him titter at his helmet. He'll settle into an adobe house with a zoologist from Germany. No electricity or plumbing, but high ceilings and a roof terrace and furniture that he has custom made according to French designs. His office at the university overlooks a courtyard, which every day fills with students and empties out again, then just before sunset fills with long-tailed birds that speckle the grounds with their shit. A few doors down is a gnarled old chemistry professor who complains about his idiotic students, about his paltry wages, and especially about the low-life employees of the railway station who, he's sure of it, have stolen the shipment of guavas that he ordered from a faraway orchard. He claims he can smell the fruit in the station, that he has found guava seeds near the tracks. My freshman year, during the first week of classes, when you could attend a lecture or 2 before committing yourself, I visited a daunting year-long math course meant for prospective math majors. By the time I found the room, a narrow auditorium with a sloped floor, the seats were already taken. I stood in the back and peered down at the professor, who seemed really far away, not only because he was in the front of the room and I was in the back, but because of his thick glasses and the way he spoke in damp, guttural torrents inflected by what might have been a mild speech impediment, not to mention the very energy in the room, a geeky electricity. "Consider a ball in n dimensions," the professor said. Below me, a pack of heads bobbing, nodding, while he chalked a mysterious inequality up on the blackboard. A ball in n dimensions? I had no idea what that meant, much as I would have liked to think it referred to a fancy dress occasion in an alternate universe. I left and took a computer science class instead. But I turned out to be lousy at computer science. I had no patience for debugging programs. And at the beginning of my sophomore year, I went back to the same math class, which was mule-headed of me, since in the prior semester, in addition to bombing out of second semester computer science, I had not done especially well in a multivariable calculus class meant for physics and engineering majors. I'd pretty much decided to leave all that behind and major in philosophy. But I can remember reading Hamlet at 19 and understanding even that play is essentially a story of a fellow adolescent who, like me, was indecisive. And there were other factors, forces that drew me back. Before that second semester came to its sorry end, I'd signed up for a math summer program, and there I learned that the math that professional mathematicians do has a different tenor from multivariable calculus for physics majors, more abstract and more rigorous. That summer, I also began an epistolatory romance via a platform called Pine, an early form of email used mostly by science people, and all too perfectly named for a facilitator of epistolatory romance, which would lead to an actual romance with someone studying physics and math. In other words, I found some social support for the whole endeavor. In other words, I fell in love. And then there was the fact that I'd felt defeated. I wanted to prove those other classes wrong. By that time, I had overcome my fear of the ball in n dimensions, and I knew that the course split into 2 classes after the first exam, one faster paced and directed at the sort of kids who seemed to have all met one another already at International Math Olympiad competitions, the other, while still challenging, accessible to more ordinary people who happen to like math. I took that other class, which as it turned out, was the best class I ever took in anything. The best class I ever took in anything, not just because I was entranced by the math itself, but because we were encouraged to work on the difficult weekly assignments in groups, and I had never collaborated like that before, arguing my way through problems with 3 or 4 or 5 other people into the wee hours of the night. We were a small band of students, giddily, exhaustedly trekking through an abstract moonscape, helping one another across patches of ice or fighting over which direction to head next. The egos, the insecurities, the unabashed nerdiness, I miss it still. Also, at 19, so much is up in the air, open to question, unreliable. I think part of what I liked about math was simply that it seemed like a sure thing as could be, a solid mass of true and rigorous and irreproachable knowledge that I could grab like a pole on a bus. I'm just going to stop there. Thank you.
So, did I turn this off? I just wanted to let you know, if you don't know what the Weil conjectures are, in case you of course, these are not taught in undergraduate mathematics, is that right?
Not to me.
Not to you. So anyway, I don't really, I think many of us have heard of the Weil conjectures, and there's some people over there who might have actually know what they are. But there they are. That's Wikipedia. So I just wanted to show that, and I didn't understand the Weil conjectures, so I went to my local mathematician on the weekend to try and learn, and he wrote this. And that was incredibly helpful, but I don't think we got all the way to the Weil conjectures, but maybe just to maybe the motivation for them. And you're wondering what that is. I think it's just number theory. I'll take that away in case it shouldn't be seen, but it's very beautiful. But you did not get to the Weil conjectures as a undergraduate.
No.
But you then came back and took a course online, as you see in the book.
Also did not include the Weil conjectures. And the Weil conjectures are the title of the book. In part, I do write about them as a non-student of them, but also because I feel the book itself is very conjectural, and it just, as soon as I read that term, I knew it was going to be the title of the book, that I was conjecturing about them and conjecturing about myself in a way. But I took a class, I retook, it might still be called Math 122. It's the Intro to Abstract Algebra course, and it was something I had taken in college, and Dick Gross taught it online 11 years ago. Or it was a Harvard class that was also filmed and put online, and so anybody can watch it, and many people have.
So in terms of mathematics, your research went that far, taking that class, and then you also must have read a bunch about André Weil and Simone Weil. You say early in your book that when you were a 15-year-old, you found Simone Weil's reader in the library,
right.
But you didn't actually read it.
I don't think I read that much of it. I think I read some of it, but her writing is, it's dense, and I think she's a very powerful figure. She was, a philosopher, an activist, and later in her very short life, a kind of mystical figure. And I think for many people, she became an emblem as much as she was a writer. Although her writing, in many places, is very beautiful, she also had a power beyond her writing just by the sort of rigor and purity of her life.
So do you want to tell us about the two characters?
Yeah,
I was
planning to do that, but then you did such a good job.
Oh no, I didn't do a very good job. I didn't do a good job.
You introduced them.
I just said when they were born.
But I do actually. I was going to bring up that line from the Stanford Encyclopedia.
Oh darn!
I love it. I don't know.
When I first started reading the book, I loved the book for different reasons. For instance, instead of picking up the Simone Weil reader, I picked up Kierkegaard's diaries, which I read, but I never read Kierkegaard. So I felt like there was some connection, I guess. But I didn't know very much about Simone Weil, other than that I'd heard her name, or André. So it would be great to just hear a little bit about their lives.
Right. Okay. So Simone, she very much, her younger life lived in the shadow of this genius brother. And even though she was a remarkable mind in her own right, had a real spiritual crisis in her adolescence because she felt like she wasn't the kind of genius that her brother was, and that she would never have access to this kind of world that he had access to. And she was depressed for a while, and then had this realization / made a decision that as long as she lived her life with the utmost attention to everything, then it didn't matter if she was a genius or not. She made this sort of mission statement for herself, which was about kind of paying a truly rigorous attention to the world, and that's what allowed her to continue. And then she really did that. I mean, she really, and she did a number of different things. She was, she graduated with a degree in philosophy, and then she went on to teach philosophy at a girls' school, but became a political activist at that time. And then, but did things like went and worked in a factory for a while so that she could understand the problem of working people from that perspective. She had a kind of disregard for her own body and health, where she would get into these extreme situations, and her parents would basically have to come rescue her. She went and fought in the Spanish Civil War very briefly, and she was a very not frail. Later in her life, she was a little bit frail because she also had she didn't eat enough in various periods of her life, but she was always pretty clumsy, or kind of, I guess we call them fine motor skills. It seems like she didn't have great kind of command of her hands. So to go and join this battalion in the Spanish Civil War and carry a rifle around was really not like a good fit for her. But she did that, and it wasn't even so much out of a strong belief. It was kind of, well, if other people are fighting and dying out there, then I need to go do that too. But she ended up stepping into it. So they had their cooking fire buried so that the smoke would come up less, and they would be less visible as a group of soldiers. And she stepped into boiling oil and had to be rescued by her parents again, which probably saved her life because a lot of other people from that unit were later killed. So she was very extreme, and during her life, what she published was mostly essays, political writing, but all the while she was writing diaries and more philosophical pieces that, after she died, were compiled by her admirers and published in book form, and her diaries were also published. And at that point, really for a post-war generation of American and some European intellectuals, she became a real hero. She had a lot of admirers, and I think part of it is really that at a time when kind of people, this post-war time when people were searching for a kind of meaning and their own kind of the religious beliefs of their parents didn't seem applicable to the world as they saw it after this horrible war. She represented a different kind of spiritual figure. She wrote a lot about kind of power in the world, power and misuse of power and turning people into objects. And she wrote about states of attention and how earthly beauty can give us access to divine beauty. And I think in a way that these two poles kind of are a shift from kind of traditional good and evil to sort of her version of good and evil. And I think that had a lot of power for people. But what interested me was not, I mean, this is not, there are long biographies of Simone Weil that you can read about, and she had a fascinating life, and her work is fascinating. But what I was really interested in here is the continuing influence of her brother and math on her life and thought. And she really admired most the Pythagoreans and the ancient Greeks, and she thought that the way that math influenced their thought. Our own thinking should be somehow more like theirs. And sometimes it's a little obscure to me exactly how that's supposed to work. But so even though she didn't become a mathematician, math was really influential in the way that she thought about everything.
In the book, you talk about a long conversation they have when André is in jail in Rouen, and she's asking him to please explain mathematics to her. And it's an interesting part because, I mean, of course, he's saying, I can't explain mathematics to you. It's like explaining a symphony to a deaf person.
Right.
It was kind of really interesting because she pushed and she pushed.
She did. I mean, and they didn't. So they went and they did these very different things in their lives. So they weren't close, either geographically or I think their relationship was not that close as adults. But he tried to get out of serving in World War II. He really was influenced by his reading of Indian texts and an idea that of what is your dharma, what is your purpose in life, and he felt that his purpose in life was to be a mathematician. He wasn't going to go fight in a war. And he tried to escape to Finland, but was arrested, eventually returned to France, and then he was jailed as a deserter. And so it really is as though, and then they exchanged these amazing letters that are all about ancient Greek mathematics and all kinds of other things, but it's as though she finally has him. She has him stuck in jail, and she's going to pin him down. Just what is it that you do? And it's both it's a question that I think resonates today is what you do is so abstract. Nobody can understand it. What's the point of something that's so abstract and out there that regular people cannot understand what it is? But also in there is this critique because she, again, in a way that's kind of obscure to me, she really felt that math had drifted away from its ancient Greek purity, and that somehow that should be restored, and that what he did was too abstract, and to her that was a loss.
Yeah. So actually, I was interested. So when you're 15, you knew there was someone called Simone Weil. When did you learn there was someone called André Weil? And what drew you to want to write about him? Was it an idea he had? Did he just look nice? Is it his glasses?
Much later, I don't even know if I encountered him in college because again, I wasn't doing algebraic geometry or anything like. But he, I think I read a book about French structuralism. I don't know. I mean, I don't remember when I first came across him, but. I was interested in him both as a mathematician, but also as Simone Weil's brother, and fascinated by the idea of two such remarkable siblings.
And which one do you like better? Sorry, I
don't know. I mean, I kind of like the pair. I think. I don't know, in that sort of which one would you invite to dinner, I'm not sure. It depends on the day. Depends on how I was feeling.
Okay. So one of the things you talk about when the part where you're talking about yourself, the good part, sorry, that's all good. You talk about a mathematician talking about the fact that there should really be three genders. It was a strange thing. There should be men, there should be mothers, which is apparently a gender, and there should be middlers, which are not clear, don't think about things. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I don't know a ton about it. So the mathematician is Felix Hausdorff, who had a sideline as an essayist, and he wrote under a pseudonym these essays, and that was from one of the essays, and I read that excerpt in another book, so I don't know, and I couldn't find the essay translated. I think it's only in German, and so I don't know the whole context, but for me, it made sense because people. Will often ask if you're a woman who studied math, well, wasn't that hard, and didn't you get a lot of grief or feel like not welcome there? And I think that I didn't feel that way, and I mean, I certainly was aware that there weren't very many other girls in the math classes that I took, but I think that I had a kind of sense of myself as a middler. So when I read that line that you just quoted, I identified with this idea that I just felt like I wasn't too far out on the spectrum, that I was somewhere close to the middle, and that somehow made it easier to be in an environment where there weren't that many other women.
Right, it's an incredibly positive story of being a math undergrad these days. One of the things I liked about it was so uplifting. But you do mention that you think maybe many mathematicians are middlers, that maybe you felt it was okay.
Well, because I think when people talk about being in a male-dominated environment, I imagine something, like, I don't know, I've never worked in, at investment banking or something, but I imagine that as like a real, like, testosterone fueled, like some sort of business environment in which you have a lot of chest beating, and that's not the way math is, or at least not the way I experienced it. I experienced a lot of people who were, inspired by these ideas, and I mean, to some extent, maybe I was, naive or not paying attention, but I didn't feel. I don't know. Yeah, I guess I did feel like people were more kind of in the middle.
Not like physicists, the chest beating.
Right, not like the chest beating physicists or the vamping lady physicists. Just
the vamping lady?
I don't know. I mean, it just like these are all I always feel like I'm getting in trouble when I talk about this. But.
Okay, so one of the things you said, that one of the reasons you liked math was about abstraction. And I guess this is something that seemed very, very beautiful. Do you mind if I read it?
Go for it.
So you should still buy the book, even though I'm going to read most of it tonight. And I don't know where I should start. And a little green shoot in my mind. There must have been something tantalizing to me about abstraction itself. Even if I couldn't have said as much at the time, I remember that in that same year discovering a pleasure in writing that was in no small part physical, delighting in the way I could move a pencil across my notebook and fill the line after line, entire pages. Of course, I didn't recognize how I'd begun to reposition myself, how ready I was to disappear into a piece of paper, how the representation of a thing could seem more alluring than the thing itself. And you write also about mathematicians being graphomaniacs. No, that's not the right word. When you're writing about André Weil, you're writing in prison. They give him a pad of paper and a pencil, and he just writes and writes and writes and writes. And that many mathematicians who you meet on the street are writing, as I showed earlier. But that somehow there was a similarity between this excitement about writing, which you do now, and the excitement of writing mathematical proofs. So I just wondered if you wanted to talk. Does that seem weird? You wrote it.
No. So and just for context, that is about that passage begins with my trying to recollect my first kind of one of the earliest memories of math that I have, and it was of maybe second grade and making little. We had these function machines where you. I don't know if it's worth explaining the function machines, but yes, I mean, I think as far as math and writing and abstraction, I think, I'm sure a lot of us have always been drawn to kind of the representation and I was just thinking about this because I've been traveling and just wondering why it is that when I enjoy traveling to a place more if I can read something about it than if I can just go there. I'm like, why can't I just go and experience this place? Why is it better to me if I have this, imaginary place in my head, and then I can be like, this is just like the one that I read about. But I'm not getting to your question, I feel like.
Okay, the question was just, there is this physical aspect of
Right.
that mathematicians have. I know a few And they're constantly writing things. And there's
Right.
something about that. You talked it later in the book about the blue, faint line blue quadrille, and how when you actually make a mathematical proof, you feel incredibly happy at the physicalness of it.
Yes, no, that's true. And I love the symbols, and yeah, I mean, I remember almost a kind of narcissism of writing something out and then just seeing it there and being like, oh, like, that's so cool. Like, just liking the way it looked, and you know, the pen that I had used and everything. Like I think it's aesthetically pleasing just on that level as well.
I know it doesn't seem like a deep question, but I thought it was. It's something that I think about all the time, and I think there's other weird people like me in the audience. That could be true.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. So this feeling that you had when you did math of liking abstraction, but also liking the sort of submerging yourself in mathematical thought and then coming up at the end. That's something that you talk about in your book as you come out of the Science Center after working on a problem set for 6 hours. The snow is falling, and you're feeling incredibly some kind of elation, mathematical elation.
Yeah.
And have you, now that you don't do math anymore, have you ever felt that again?
Well, in the book, I say it's the mental equivalent of having gone for a long run, like just this, and you know, I don't think there's something in my current life that's exactly like it. I mean, I think writing does provide, you know, these immersive experiences, and you can come out and feel kind of good about it maybe, but to me, it's not exactly the same. And when I went back and took the class, it was a kind of remembering of that, that sort of mental state, which you know, to me, it's particular to my experience of mathematics, and it doesn't happen in other areas of life.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's too bad.
So, sorry, I'm not really very good at this. I apologize. So your son, who I don't know how old he is, but when you wrote, was asking really interesting questions about where numbers are when they're at home. Is that?
Yeah, or, you know, it wasn't even where they're at home. He just wanted to know, he was, you know, where are numbers? Are they in our heads or are they out there?
And have you figured that out?
No.
Has he figured it out?
I think he's moved on to other questions about numbers, but I loved that he asked that question. We had a great conversation about it, and then neither of us could figure out the answer.
Really? I was kind of really hoping that's just my question that I thought you could talk for like 15, 20 minutes. Sorry. Sorry. Yes, I should get serious here. So you didn't really want to be either André or Simone in the end. Simone died of essentially starving herself.
Well, it's tricky because she always had, she was ate sparingly, and with political ideas about not wanting to indulge in luxury, not wanting to eat more than she imagined poor people were eating, though she was making up the quantity that poor people were eating in her mind. But she did get sick with tuberculosis, and what happened was, or tuberculosis? Anyway, she got sick, she went to the hospital, and because she had such a strange kind of disordered eating pattern, really just wasn't able to eat enough to recover. So it's not clear if she actually did starve herself intentionally or if she was just unable to eat enough to get well because she was so restricted in her eating already. Which I think is different. Like, in other words, the question is, did she intend to starve herself to death? And I think the answer might be no, but that she did die of, in part, not eating enough, if that makes sense.
Last night, I was somewhere else. I wasn't here. I'm not here when you're not here. There was a bunch of people, and I was saying how great Simone Weil was and what a great role model she was. And they said, no, she's not a great role model because she killed herself. But I said, she was so intensely interested in something, and in that sense, she was a role model. I know she wanted to, she had a lot of strange ideas, like she wanted to become a nurse and be airlifted into the front lines, which actually doesn't seem so strange, but no one would let her do that. I'm just wondering, like, I am very attracted to those kind of people. I mean, it would be even better if she was a chain-smoking alcoholic as well. and I'm wondering, I'm just wondering, but this intensity of thought is very, very appealing, and I'm wondering whether that's part of what you saw in here.
Yeah, for sure. She was incredibly intense, and she lived at extremes, which is not how I live, but it was very appealing to me, especially as an adolescent, that somebody could do that into adulthood, is stay so devoted to their principles and be this, cool French intellectual with those glasses, it really.
Wait, those aren't cool glasses.
Oh. Yeah, I mean.
And they spoke Greek to each other.
And they spoke ancient Greek to each other. It was just this life of the mind that just seemed so amazing and French. And
so amazing and French.
Yeah, I mean, my adolescence was not like that, and so I think she does. She did for me represent this kind of ideal that was unattainable, and she also could never attain her own ideal, but she was so kind of balls to the wall in trying and living like that.
So now, André was also kind of interesting because he was one of the first, one of the founders of Bourbaki, which is this group of mathematicians who decided to lay out the framework of modern mathematics, but they called themselves by Nicholas Bourbaki?
Right.
And they signed all their papers, Bourbaki, and then it turns out there's some story where when he's traveling, he gets put in jail because they think he's a spy because he calls himself Bourbaki, or was his?
Well, that was actually because he had received a letter from a Russian mathematician. He had these Russian documents in his possession.
But his passport didn't say Nicholas Bourbaki?
It was not on his passport, no, but should have. So Bourbaki actually, it began as a group of young professors in France who were teaching analysis, introductory analysis, and they were dissatisfied with the textbook, the standard textbook at the time. And so their initial, they met up at a cafe, and initially it was just about rewriting this analysis textbook. And I guess because they were young and ambitious, it turned into rewriting the foundations of mathematics. And they continued to meet for years and to work on these volumes together that were produced under this name Bourbaki, and which was kind of a joke, but also kind of relieved them of sort of trying, arguing about authorship. It was all going to be Bourbaki, but then they really kind of stuck to this idea that these, some of these papers, the initial papers that they submitted under that name, and there were, some others. The story I like is that this American, I forget what it was called, maybe Mathematical Reviews. There was this American editor of Math Journal or yearbook who tried to explain that Bourbaki was a pseudonym being used by a group of French mathematicians, and his name I think was Ralph Boas, B-O-A-S, and one of them wrote in alleging that Boas was just the pseudonym for the group of editors that published this other journal. So they were very kind of prankish, and they had a great spirit about them.
And do they exist today?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Anybody here in it? Yes?
Do you?
Okay, I guess they must know. I have to ask you a question. A lot of what's in here is, not a lot. Some of it is not nonfiction. Some of it is you imagining things that.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, when we're reading it, where's the line you put between just like, for instance, when I read the piece about Simone's dream. Did you make that up, or?
That I did make up. So my
Really good.
my sort of rules for myself were to kind of stick with what I had learned from the biographies as much as possible. In other words, don't write something that is directly contradicted in something that I had read, but also to make them characters, to conjecture about their lives. I have them talking to each other, and I don't have an actual record of the conversation, but I know that they were. So in this one case, I know that Simone actually made this visit to André, but I don't know what they actually said during that visit, and I'm inventing what they said. So.
And does anybody get upset with you?
Yeah. Well, people get upset that there are no footnotes,
Yeah.
and I think because to me, I came to this knowing that Simone had been written about a lot, and that she had. That there were multiple biographies of her, and so I didn't, and that I was more interested in her as a part of this sibling relationship, and how she was influenced by math. So, people who I think a couple people who are really, devoted to her and love her work feel that I haven't included enough of it in here, or done it justice, or done her justice.
So I actually think the book is incredibly good the way it is.
Thanks.
And I'll tell you why. I'm telling you guys. So it's not so you'll buy it, but so that you'll read it anyway. So it weaves you and these two wonderful people in. But on about every page, there's a moment where you go, oh, really? There's an idea. I'm going to go read about this. I'm going to go think about this. It is almost like it's completely rich. You don't explain anything. No, sorry. You don't explain the Weil Conjectures or what Simone Weil wrote, but it has all the interesting ideas to jump off from that you've seeded in here. So now I think this is my book for the year, and here are all my little points of jumping off. Unless I lose it, everything's going to be very good. But I was wondering whether we might take some, unless do you have anything else you want to tell me exactly? Or should we take some audience?
Audience questions, I'm all for it.
Audience questions? Do you have any questions? Yes? Okay, great.
And I have a microphone up here. Hello. I'm just going to, if you raise your hand, I'll run it through the audience.
Oh, do you want me to run a microphone?
You can do the other one. That's great.
Okay.
I have a quick question. When I was reading a biographical sketch, I noted that you went to Harvard undergraduate and majored in math. I thought, well, that's pretty adventurous of you. But I was perplexed after that you didn't continue your graduate studies in a field either in math or physics or biochemistry or something very analytical, because if you have the skills to get an AB in math from Harvard, you're obviously good. So I'm just curious, what made you change or develop a more expansive, non-technical career?
Why are you more like me?
Math was always, I always wanted to be a writer. That always came first. And so I loved studying math, but I wasn't, and I did consider going on, but I ultimately just wanted to be a writer more. So, and I also, I feel that I am, I always forget which one is the hedgehog and which one is the fox, but whichever is the one that likes to do a lot of things. And I felt like I would be a bad academic because I'm less good at boring down, and I like to cover a lot of ground. So
I really like the story in the book where you say you were at the math summer camp, and you were with a guy you were working on some mathematics, and then you said to him, well, of course, you want to be a novelist. You eventually want to write a novel, right? And he said, no.
I was
You said, what? What do you mean you don't want? We all want to write novels, right? That's what we want to do. It wasn't. That was the moment.
Yeah, I was convinced that everybody wanted to write a novel, but that, you know, only a few select people got to do it, and then the rest of us had to choose other lines of work. And so, so I actually was really taken aback when this brilliant math and computer science fellow told me he did not want to write a novel. He was like, it was just like, no, I want to be a mathematician. And it was just like, oh, like it took that for me to understand that it was my own desire and not just something in the water.
Hi, okay, I'm way back. Thank you both for a great conversation. So this question may be a little unjustified because I haven't read the book, but how does it, so you have the siblings and yourself in the book. So it's kind of a biography of the siblings and the autobiography. So how does it work? Like, or how did you intend to write a biography of the mathematicians and philosopher and yourself?
So when I started the book, well, one, I'll say it doesn't work for everybody, but when I started the book, I didn't know if it would work. It was an experiment, and I just wanted to try it. I imagined self-publishing because it wasn't something that I felt like I was like, I don't know what this is. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm just gonna write it. So, I mean, I don't know how to answer exactly, except to say that these things resonate for me, and I hope they will for the reader. But it was an experiment, not something where I felt sure that it was going to work.
But it's kind of exciting, this encounter of somebody interesting with these two figures who are both dead.
They are.
And it also, I have to say that it really works, and it is like some kind of tapestry, I think. And there's a lot of sort of aphoristic-ness. Is that a word? Aphoristicness. That is, there's small pieces that you can sort of see come out in the tapestry, little tufts flying out in places. And so for me, it's much, much better. And for my friend, the mathematician, who said, you basically can't read a biography of mathematics, but this one was somehow very, very, very compelling, and you just read the whole thing right through. Sorry, I answered your question. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Because I imagine there are other people in the room, too, who aspired to become mathematicians at some point and discovered they really weren't cut out for it. And I appreciate your honesty about how you went through this test of yourself, in a sense. So I learned something about Bourbaki group. And I wondered if, well, two things. One, you probably are familiar with the story that Bourbaki himself was this invented character at the university that would show up at the math class once a year, right, and get to the board and write nonsense. And it was sort of a thing for the math students. And that person, who was a failed military officer, I guess, a French military officer, was sort of the emblem of the group, and that became just the pseudonymous, sorry, I'll get it one day, right, author. But you said you had a great interest and were very excited by your class where you worked as a group. And I wondered whether you found any identification with the Bourbaki group, which itself was a rather unusual phenomena, as they had this kind of a special secret society that would have a retreat each year, and they just would let certain people come who you had to vote. And then the conduct of the meetings were supposedly very severe. They would talk endlessly and argue, and there were some principles about it. I wonder if you had any identification with that or knew things about it that excited you.
Sorry, what was tell me again the question?
Whether you found, well, you found identification with Simone, and you found a link there, and I wonder if you saw the Bourbaki group and André's involvement with it in some way analogous, or somehow it inspired something in your book or your thoughts about mathematics and how it gets conducted in a group setting. We think of mathematicians as isolated individuals and often going off on a boat somewhere and just thinking. But in this case, the Bourbaki group was a collaboration, very extended over decades, I think.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think in general, when I came to college, I had that idea of mathematicians as isolated people and geniuses and garrets figuring stuff out. And so when I did finally get into math classes and start working on problem sets with other people, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And I think I'm not a mathematician now. I think different mathematicians probably work in different ways. But yes, I do like stories of collaboration, and I wish those were as much part of our cultural archetype as that sort of isolated genius is.
Oh, hi. I guess I had a question about sort of the two main roles you have now. I guess in terms of editing and also in terms of writing your own novels. I guess to you do you think together those form a sort of balance, or how do you view those two different roles?
Of writing and editing?
Yeah.
Well, editing is more social, more and more practical in many ways. But it also satisfies a kind of, since I don't do math anymore, when it is a puzzle to me that I get to solve. So, and I'm not somebody who would, I don't know. To me, writing is something that it's better done 2 or 3 hours a day than trying to write for 8 hours a day. So, so that's how I work. I like to combine those because to me, novels are in the morning, or writing comes in the morning and editing comes in the afternoon, and that is just my sort of metabolism for the day.
So I'm a mathematician, and so a lot of us mathematicians, learning about the Weil conjectures is one of these kind of landmark moments. You can remember where you were when you learned, and there was the way life felt before you knew about them, and the way life felt after. And I just wondered if you could describe some of your experience with learning about the conjectures themselves.
Well, I only learned about the conjectures descriptively because I don't have the full background. Of course, when I was working on this, I really wanted to, well, maybe I could just, keep going, keep learning more math until I can actually really understand them. I mean, the way I understand the Weil conjectures is more I've read some popular writing about the Riemann hypothesis, and so I kind of understand that in a very vague descriptive way, and then the analogy between that and the Weil conjectures, so I could kind of say them, but I can't. I would still. I envy you. I wish I could get there. I would like to know. I would like to understand them on that level.
So maybe we should have a Weil conjecture talk, Mike, up here.
Yeah.
Because I think, really, there it is. Sorry, I think it would be great. I mean, it is true that if it's so meaningful to you, and when you were saying that, I looked at other mathematicians in the audience who were nodding their heads, and the fact that you don't learn it as an undergraduate is odd, right? It's a huge moment of the. Anyhow, I'm just trying to get him to give a talk.
Yeah, I would like to watch.
Come?
Well, I don't know if I can come from Texas, but I'll watch the video.
So we have time for about 2 more questions, I think, if that sounds good. And I'm also going to ask a question. Sorry, I'm being selfish, but I absolutely loved your book, and I was hoping that you have a great passage about how rigorously attentive both of the Weil siblings are, and how André is in prison focusing intently on the intellectual, and his sister is focusing intently on the physical in a lot of ways. And in our current society, we seem to be fleeting our attention between all sorts of things almost rapidly because of technology. I was just hoping maybe you could talk more about your thoughts in writing on their incredible intensity to their one focus.
Well, I think that is part of the attraction to me in trying to write about them, is that I do feel, of course, we're all so distracted now. And it was interesting, I was in another bookstore last night, and the bookstore owner there was saying, oh yeah, there's been a real resurgence of interest in Simone Weil in the past 3 years. And when I had no idea, when I started writing the book it was 3 years ago, and I certainly didn't feel like I was riding the wave of some resurgence of interest in Simone Weil, but it makes sense to me, both because of the way that she writes about power and because of the way that she is just really such a model of kind of paying close attention to the world. It makes a lot of sense to me that she would be more, that people would be turning to her now in this moment.
I found the book jacket design very beautiful, and I was just wondering if there's any story or meaning behind the choice of artwork on the cover.
So the painter is a friend. She lives in Austin. Her name is Jessica Hallinan. I think she's a wonderful painter. And we went through a few different jackets, and I was just, but all the while I had that painting in mind and feeling like the jackets that we were coming up with were not as good as that painting, and so.
Is there any connection to the math specifically?
No, not specifically. But and one thing that I love about it, I mean, in a way, like I don't even want to talk about it because it sort of flattens it out, like projects it onto, a fewer number of dimensions than the way that I feel about that painting. But I just, to me, because it is, circular, it does have a kind of mathematical quality to it, and it's abstract, but then that little bent guy just gives it a human quality as well. And
A little bent guy.
Yeah.
For those of you who, well, you can just buy it.
Yeah, that just, I've always loved that painting, and when I asked her if she could, if we could use it, she said, oh yeah, that'd be great, because I've never, if she had sold the painting to somebody else, then we would have to go through that person. She was like, oh yeah, great, because I'm saving that one for my daughter. So, I don't have any, it's not owned by anybody else. And that was meaningful to me, that this one that I had loved, she was saving for her daughter.
Well, that was, oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Karen, thank you for coming and sharing your passion. Regarding publishing, can you share some of your experience, some highlights, what worked, what didn't work? Also some experiences in garnering attention and
Getting it published.
Getting it published? Well, I'm just lucky to have a fantastic editor who I had already worked with on the novel at a publishing house that's not as focused on how to market things, because we did send it out to more than one editor, and most of them said, oh, I love it, but I don't know how to sell this. And the editor that I already had for my book, just that wasn't her approach. She just said, great, So it was, it was already having that connection, but also a connection to a place that wasn't overly kind of Salesforce driven.
It's kind of highbrow. Thank you. Sorry, can we thank Karen Olsson?